some of those discussions that we don't really have too much of.
Hang on one second.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right,
Yes.
just a little bit. Yeah. Okay. Glad to be
All
here.
right. So I see. So, oh my God, what a pleasure to be able to get back on board to discuss. So today I'm really wanting to um, see if we can talk a little more on, our children, right? I've had a lot of clients who are like really struggling in the area of, having gone through some of these processes. So before we jump on, I'm just going to introduce myself real quick and we talk about this really important topic. So much needed conversation around this. Um, so my name is Gina Chimesi. If you're tuning in for the first time, my channel, I talk about everything concerning mental health with a big focus on trauma treatment, healing from trauma, however way you're looking at it. And today we have our guest, Dr. Christina Cucciella. I know you're a super busy woman, and I'm so appreciative of your quick response and being able to be here with me. Dr. Cucciella is a huge advocate, social justice woman pushing the work around domestic violence, social sexual assault, coercive control. It's like one of your biggest area, which I'm really, really intrigued by because most of us as professional women, not to mention, the average everyday woman out there, my mother, my auntie, whoever, in this room, and as well as our men, we don't talk about it enough or we don't even recognize. And I love when you put it as it's very insidious. So you're a clinician, like you have that clinician experience, as well as you're an educator, you're a professor, you've been a professor for a long time, over 20 years, I believe. You're a researcher in this area. So not only are you doing it, but you're trying to find different ways. But my biggest passion and love around the fact that you're actually coaching and teaching clinicians and lawyers. And I hope judges too. Hopefully, if they're not busy enough, you can kind of corner them and teach them some of this stuff. Because when we get to it, most of us don't get into marriages, right? And want to separate or divorce per se and end up going to court because sometimes you have no choice depending on the question communication issues. You have to get that third mediator, and sometimes ends up being a lawyer and then maybe a judge as well. And if that judge or lawyer has zero idea of what coercive control looks like and presents itself, and the children are caught in the middle, that insidiousness, even if I'm saying this right, can really, really do a number on our mental health, and not to mention our physical health. So I really appreciate your time. I know we have defined this before, but can you please, I love your definition. I want it to come straight from you. Can you define coercive control for some of us who might not know and curious to know what it is? How do we look at it in a layman's terms?
Sure, sure. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm so grateful for all of the work that you're doing. I mean, it takes an army of us. I call it, I say we need a sea of allies
Ah,
working in this field. And
yes.
that's what I'm trying to create. I'm doing anything I can to educate people. So thank you for that lovely introduction. Coercive control is the foundation of, frankly, all abuse. All
Okay.
abuse. And so, what I would say is that I don't even want to use the word domestic violence anymore. I don't even want to use domestic abuse. I want to say it's all coercive control. Now, I use domestic abuse because that's the term people are familiar with. But I think the most important thing people need to recognize
Mhm.
is that a hit or a punch or a verbal assault, whatever it is, it's
Right.
all about one person trying to exert power and control over another person.
Absolutely.
People exert power over us. And when they're really, really angry and have poor coping skills, you know this as a trauma person, right?
Oh
When they
yeah.
have poor coping skills, they're going to be sometimes physically violent. The issue is that coercive control is literally about stripping away a person's autonomy, their agency. So it happens slowly and insidious in a nuanced way over time, or let's be clear, it can
Right.
happen quickly. So
Right.
I say that coercive control is the foundation of racism,
Yes.
classism, gender. Think about the people who make decisions in our world historically
Right. Of
to
course.
oppress either an individual or groups of people. The reason why they did it is they wanted to exert power over another human being.
Of course. Of course.
And
Of course.
so I see it as the foundation of all isms. I see it as the foundation of all child abuse. I mean, when, there can be some maladaptive coping, but it's about a need to retain control. Now, some people can heal from that. But most often, when it's happening behind closed doors,
Mhm.
most often the people exerting this power and control over others have characterological traits that are disordered,
Right.
and they can't be healed. And so I want your listeners to hear that just because someone is nice to you today, if they have a pattern of behavior of
Pattern.
putting you down,
Mm.
diminishing you, counter parenting,
Mhm.
trying to control your finances. It is all of those things. It's psychological abuse, it's gaslighting, manipulation, it's intimidation, isolation. Ask yourself right now, am I seeing my family as much as I would like to?
Right.
Am I able to go and maybe go to the hairdresser as often as I'd like to?
Mm.
My money or with our family money? Am I made to feel like I'm not a good parent?
Mm.
When I'm down, when I have shared something really significant, like a vulnerability, has a person during anger thrown that back in my face?
Mhm.
Have they
Mhm.
used that against me? Perpetrators love to use our vulnerabilities against us. You tell them a secret, a family secret about maybe something that happened with your uncle or an aunt in the family, and then all of a sudden they're going to hold that against you. If any of that is happening, and it's happened more than once,
Mhm.
it's a pattern and it's coercive control.
Oh my goodness. It's the pattern. And sometimes we miss that. We don't recognize that. And you mentioned, and I was like, I think I listened to that like 5 times. I'm like, what? Your episode with Dr. Ramani. I was literally hooked and I was like, wow. And the fact that a lot of clinicians, right, therapists, when that's happening, guess what? Most of the time, the victim will seek help, right? And then you're talking about what's going on. You're describing, the other person is making you feel second guessing your decisions, your intellect, your abilities to be able to be, um independent with your decision making. So, like make you feel less than or make you second guess yourself and diminish your self-worth, right? So when you don't feel worthy, guess what? You're gonna eventually be able to easily relinquish that to them because you're like, after like, I guess I'm not good at anything. Who says at least he think he lost me and he says and I'm saying he because majority of the time is the he. Sometimes, not to say that's a small percentage where the state can be turned around and the female is the one perpetrating this. But what have you found is the reason why many clinicians, is it from our, myself also going through my program, is it because we don't really touch this in our, rotations at school? Is that why clinicians, therapists, when we run to them for support, for help, a lot of times it might take a long time, or a lot of, if you don't have good support or advocacy behind you as a person suffering or needing help to shield yourself and your kiddos, and they're not recognizing it too, for them to also be an advocate if you're in court, for example. How are they not seeing it? Only if it's a physical abuse, I think it's right away. Many of them you are dismissed. You're like, oh yeah, at least it's not hitting you. You hear that a lot. Why are
Yeah.
they missing it?
Sure. So I think there's a couple things that we could probably talk about here.
Yeah.
One is that the idea that men are victims is absolutely true. And we know this particularly in non heterosexual relationships.
Sure.
Okay. But I want to be really clear with your listeners is that the statistics that are out there are not valid. And here's why.
Okay.
If a victim is trapped in the laundry room, let's say,
Mm.
and he won't let her out, and then she finally pushes him and he calls the police. Now he's had her trapped in the laundry room. He's done this before. He won't let her out of the laundry room because they're arguing and he won't let her have free space. And this one time she pushes back and he calls the police. He is now a victim of domestic abuse
Right.
versus she's been a victim all along. And she just acted in a self-defensive way. I really want to eradicate the word reactive abuse. That is bullshit. Sorry. That is BS because it is not reactive abuse. It is self-defense. When somebody has you cornered over and over and over again, you do push back. And those are the incidences that are very likely to be held account as a victim, as making a male a victim. Again, men can be victims, but it's a much lower rate. Let's be really honest. We live in a patriarchal world.
Yeah.
We live in a world where men have more power, where they can exert more power physically, financially, and socially, certainly. And so knowing that that's the way that the world is run, we just know when we have statistics. Listen, women suffer at a much greater rate this underlying need for power and control.
Right.
That being said, I think it's really important to also highlight that just because I'm saying that not as many men suffer it, we need men in this allies group. Because just like with breast cancer,
Yes.
when we talk about breast cancer, we talk about women getting it more, even though men can get it.
Yeah, too, right.
Breast cancer, of course they can. Do we ever talk about that? No, we don't talk about that. You know why? Because women get it at a much higher rate.
Right.
And we have men doing breast cancer awareness walks, and we have men advocating for research. And the reason why is because we all need to work together. Domestic abuse impacts women and children at a much greater rate, and we need everyone to work together. Now, the courts are complicit. And sometimes therapists get hired to do what's called repair therapy with an abusive parent. So I would say that and I know with our schooling, we're taught to validate people. We're taught to support them. But when a victim comes in and she's explaining what's happening and she's dysregulated and overwhelmed, she's often pathologized as being anxious and depressed, which are probably reasonable.
Yes.
But he comes in as a charlatan.
Yes.
He comes in like he's willing to work with the therapist. And so what happens is, I think, this is just my hypothesis, that as therapists, most people who go into this work, most of us are highly empathic and giving. And we want to give people the benefit of the doubt.
Yes.
And so just like we forgave the abuser over and over and over again, and gave him many opportunities to show up as a decent human. I think what happens sometimes in the therapeutic space is therapists are trying hard to get that relationship to work. They are trying to fix it rather than calling out that's abuse. And so therapists don't do that as often as maybe, and I know that some do, believe me, I know some do, but I think overall it's easy to get hoodwinked by the abuser. That's their goal. That's what they do all day long. They make everyone think they're someone they're not.
Of course.
And so certainly happened to me, 3 or 4 therapists who kept telling me, you're anxious, you need to do this, you need to work harder to make the relationship better. And the reality is that he had done so many egregious things. There was no reason for me to be working harder. And so I would say that I wrote something down here. I just want to make sure I get to it.
Right.
That in general, and let me go back to men of victims. So that's called DARVO, right? When men deny, or women deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. And this is what doctors do all day long.
Yep.
And so, that's the gaslighting. Like, oh, wait a minute, maybe I did do something wrong. But then you go to a therapist, and that therapist, again, is trying to fix the relationship rather than looking distinctly at each person and wondering, we need to ask, what's the foundation of this relationship? What is the foundation? What have been the dynamics going on in this relationship? Has there been one person exerting power over another for a period of time? Is there a pattern of this behavior? If there is, wow, I need to tell him I'm not going to work with him. Hang on one second. And I need to work with her. But
Yeah.
how many times, maybe this hasn't happened to you, but how many times has your license been threatened by
Of
abusers?
Of course, many times. And for the fact that you even want to seek help or seek help, that vulnerability piece, you talked about it in your description of what coercive control is weaponized against you. And sometimes I think it's getting to the point where it's getting better, though. Many judges in the past will use a partner who's been victimized seeking mental health services, not just therapy. Sometimes even used to be just therapy. Even if you saw therapy, you're regarded as, unfit psychologically to manage your kids. So a lot of times judges will give you even less time with the kids, and they give your abuser rather more time with the kids. It's starting to change now a lot of times with the lawyers and judges, where they're looking at it from the perspective of, okay, what led to you needing to seek help for therapy? I am not sure if you're seeking help with medication management, if that's also kind of weaponized against you or against women a lot of times in agreements, in divorce agreements in the court system. And I know a lot of times coming to light of it, having had my own journey in the system and having had a partner that I had to deal with. I don't, I'm not saying any names by any means, but I use my story a lot to educate. So a lot of our women don't spend that long of a time that I spend trying to love more, trying to change myself different ways in order to make the relationship work or do it for the sake of the kids. Whereas the kids are really kind of, like struggling in the midst of that, and sometimes stepping away is the greatest thing. So weaponizing that and using the GALs, I'm trying to remember the definition of GAL, I just know the acronym. So they will, court appoint you a GAL. If I'm saying it right, it's a GAL, right? To come
Guardian ad
in.
litem.
Right,
Guardian ad
right.
litem. Mhm.
Right. And a lot of time, if that guardian is not really also versed in the world of trauma and is not versed in knowing what coercive control look like, knowing that it's very insidious. You said something really important, and I'll go to my point. But Dr. Radmini mentioned, the control piece, the power. They need to have power. It's the need to have power, domination, the need to have some type of a validation with using those manipulative tactics. But the things that happen in regards to the power, the control, is so insidious that the GAL might not necessarily pick up on it. Like in your story where you mentioned things like, the water gets shut off or the light gets shut off, the garage door is not opening, you can't go. But you can check it to almost like, hey, what happened? Did I do something? Is a, circus? Somebody actually, it's hard to believe that somebody will actually go and turn it off and make it not work. Oh, I think I lost it there. Okay, here we go. You okay?
Yeah, we lost each other. It was buffering. So I
Oh,
just
that's
heard
fine.
up
Oh,
here to
okay.
help. Yeah.
Okay. I'm glad you're back. So those instead of like really, really tiny moments like that, lights, water, or the bills are not being paid and you're trying to talk about it. Why is the cable shut off? Can we have a budget? Simple things like that where it's taking years to just set a simple budget, and that's a source of conflict, or you're like making you feel crazy because the light is not working, electricity is not working, you can't open the garage door to go where you need to go, or your child cannot go to here and there or come to your home because now it's their parenting time, but the other partner is doing all these tactics, manipulations. It's not obvious, right? It's not obvious. I've heard stories of where partners are even withholding tax returns from the victim. But these are things where maybe the CPA is coached, or they have power with money, especially with the partners or the men who have more, power regards to, they have monetary, if you want to say, like they're more, and they have more money than the victim, or they control so much they're getting an allowance. If you're getting an allowance once a week and your partner is the one who's controlling all the money, how are you gonna really define it? Somebody at GAL can say, well, at least your bills are paid, you're getting a lot of allowance. So that type of insidiousness is where my point to the question is, how do we really get to the bottom of it quicker than some of us? It took us over 10 years. I think yours took over 10 years for you to know, no, I know something is not right here. Even through the process was hard. How do we, in a relationship, right? As you're dating, I'm doing a lot of work around dating. How do we recognize that in dating, first, second year of marriage, before a decade comes around, to say, okay, I'm going to step out? How do we go that process? What do you usually tell women? I know it took a long time for me to get to the question, but I wanted to color it so people can really see the story behind the question. So
Yeah.
how do we recognize that?
Sure. So I think I actually mentioned this on the Dr. Ramani episode where I called the re-traumatization list. You can call it the clarity list. She calls it the icky list. And I think one of the things that really needs to happen is we need to be really self-reflective in everything in our life, right? And this is just in general, we all as human beings, as parents, as workers, we need to be really self-reflective and really look inside of ourselves and see how our body feels about certain things, about our relationship, about our job, about I don't know, the gym we go to. Like what are we really feeling? And
How
so
about the church we go to? Like I say that I don't want to catch you, but I wanted to throw that in because even in spirituality, journey with spirituality, Christianity, whatever if you're a Muslim, if you're Buddhist, even in those communities, your vulnerability really can be weaponized because you're showing up with a little tad of vulnerability. You're seeking some type of comfort and peace from there. So I want to, some of our viewers who are in those communities to also be able to recognize that, especially when your partner is also within that same communities, can be very
very,
difficult.
yeah, or their family members, because
Yes,
like
family.
leaving that person means you leave, that you're going to have to go to church and maybe see people that are, maybe think bad things about you. What abusers love to do is they love to flip the narrative. So they have what we call, right, flying monkeys, where people start to have a bad narrative about you. And then you want to go to church, but you're not going to be comfortable there anymore. So you end up staying with someone who has already shown you who they are. I do
Mm,
call it the re-traumatization list. I mean, you write down for yourself just things. Ask yourself, when something happens, how does this make me feel? Not just psychologically.
mm,
How does this make my body feel? We really have to connect the mind and the body, and for maybe the spirit. Like, really, like, what are the ways that this incident, this little argument that just happened in the kitchen, how
mm,
am I feeling about it? Is it accurate? Or was I called a name? Like, these are the things.
mm,
Were you called a name? Were you put down? So there's a thing online. It's called fair fighting rules, and it really talks
mm.
about how like name calling is just off. You're not supposed to name call. You're not supposed to put somebody down when you're arguing.
Mm.
You can argue about something. You don't stockpile and have an argument where you bring in the kitchen sink instead of dealing with the one issue that you're dealing with.
Right.
And then ask yourself, is this person stonewalling me where they don't
Mm,
talk to me for 3 days because I went out with girlfriends? Like,
mm,
write down, wait a minute, Friday night, I went out with girlfriends. He hasn't talked to me in 3 days.
mm,
That's an example of something that is someone trying to exert power over you.
mm, mm.
And so the thing about the term coercive control is that it can be physical violence, but physical violence is not the defining characteristic.
Oh,
It's
yes.
not. And so does it eventually become physical violence? It can.
Yeah.
Which is so really knowing that if you're in a relationship where someone is already pushing your boundaries, and ask yourself, where are my boundaries?
Mhm.
What is going on here? And again, that's about being attuned to yourself.
Yes,
And
yes.
that attunement is very necessary. And the thing is, if the abuser does not want you, nor your children, to be attuned to
Right.
yourselves,
Yes.
because if he has you living in a space where you're not sitting with who you are,
Right.
stripped away your autonomy, you have no agency, you have no voice, and your children have no agency. They have no voice. And this is his goal. This is the goal of the abuser, is to strip everyone away from the ability to see clearly. So
Right.
you need to intentionally work on seeing clearly. You need to listen, it might be the healthiest relationship in the world. There's nothing wrong with writing down what happened during this argument.
For
Now,
sure.
if what happened in that argument was really bad and you know it's abusive because of some of the things we've talked about, and it happens again after you address it with this person, oh, now we're onto something. This is a pattern. This
Right.
relationship isn't healthy. This relationship is toxic. How do I get myself out of it?
Out of there.
Mhm.
Especially if you're dealing, relationships, of course, is work, even friendships with our girlfriends, friendship with our boyfriends that's non-romantic. It takes work to maintain that, right? But when, you can get disagreements happening, but when, each of you is reciprocal, right? You're able to recognize where you went wrong and able to say, like myself, say, hey, oh my God, I didn't do that right. You feel some level of guilt. You might reach out, you know, later and say, hey, I'm really sorry. I'll try not to do that again. Let's say you do it again, but you have that empathy within you. And I think that the big difference between somebody who's actually intentionally being coercive or manipulative, they don't typically tend to even want to recognize or self-aware enough to even want to apologize or make the relationship move in a better direction, or it's just like one way, their way a lot of times. Would you say
Sure.
that's the truth in most of this? Really, when you start dating, you're recognizing some of these patterns, being self-aware enough to say, this might not work out in the long run. Yeah, we pick your poison, right? You pick your poison. Being in relationships take work. But do you want to stay in a relationship that can cause you to spiral mentally, cause you to have a lot of medical issues because of all the stress that your body has to take?
Sure.
We all have different bandwidth, right? Tolerance levels. I've come to
Mhm.
recognize that some people can stay in those relationships. Once again, talking about picking your poison, you're staying in it, but how well are you staying in it? Should I stay or so? I think once again, Dr. Romney had that book. Should I stay or should I go? If you're staying, are you able to tolerate that? Or are you having frequent upheaval, stress? Then what's the point of being there? Where most of us culturally we are encouraged to stay in, trade away, love it, work on yourself and be able to tolerate it. But you recognizing maybe you are different, you don't have enough bandwidth in you enough to stay with it and being able to free yourself. People might not give you that grace of saying, oh yeah, I see that. People might shame you or guilt you up, and being okay with that fact of setting that boundary and sitting with it. Because I love it so much when you say, learning. A lot of us did not, including myself, did not learn what boundaries are. This is why I'm so passionate about this work. Many of us didn't get it from our moms. If you're listening here right now, I don't know what your story is. Share it in the comments and let us know. Like some of us, including I use myself as an example.
Mhm.
Growing up, maybe culturally where I'm coming from is very common, but I know you do this work, so obviously this transcends culture. This transcends social class. Boundaries is something you set for yourself, but if you don't have that inner work done to recognize and sit there and you know what's going on within your body and be able to say, this doesn't feel right. I need to remove myself. Wishing that person to change might never happen. Would that
Yeah.
be right? Wishing that person to change, because some people really go years and years, have patience. I mean, I'm talking decades of
Right.
wishing and wanting their partner to change, wishing like the Connecticut weather. I say this all the time, and I think this is something I also learned from Dr. Romney, like wishing the weather in Connecticut or Chicago to like switch up to summer weather in middle of February. I don't think that will ever happen, and really making peace with that fact. But how? No, so now going on without me babbling on well enough, how do we transition from, if you're recognizing, right, you're self-aware, you're recognizing your body time and time again is reacting, you're feeling discomfort, you can't tolerate it. Now you say, hey, okay, I'm gonna make this the decision to move. A lot of times I have learned that it's not safe to have that discussion with that partner because it's not always going to work out good. How do we educate us? How's the best way to navigate that with yourself and your kiddos and set some boundaries around separation moving forward with that?
Gosh, I feel like that's a whole nother episode or something because there's a
Right.
lot of safety, there's a lot of like safety parameters in there. But I think the most important thing, first of all, I just wanted to just address that sometimes really malignant, harmful abusers are very good at apologizing what seems like authentically.
Oh.
And so they will implore you to forgive them. They will be very much, um,
Mm.
a good actor. And so
Mm.
the question is it a pattern of behavior? Is
Mm.
there a pattern? And a pattern means more than once. If you want to give someone twice, that might be too much, but a pattern means more than once. And so, when somebody says, your mother this, and you tell them, listen, I don't appreciate that, and please don't ever do that again, and then they do it again, that's a pattern. So I think it's really important to recognize that these individuals who are extremely harmful. I did a podcast with Susan Guthrie, and I talked about the anatomy of the abuser. And
Mm.
what we know is that it's a spectrum, but
Mm.
that the most harmful are very, very good at being covert about it, and they're the people who show up in therapy and seem like the decent guy. They're the person who is the teacher, or the like, they have a good job. They don't look like domestic abuse perpetrators.
Yes.
So but to your point about escape, because I only have a moment or two left,
Right.
your point
Right.
about escape is, I think that it has to be really well thought out. I think that there's no judgment if you stay,
Oh,
because
yeah.
we get that sometimes staying feels safer, especially when you feel like if you leave, maybe your children will be indoctrinated against you, will be further oppressed. But I will say this: leaving gives your children the gift of perspective.
For sure.
If
Yes.
nothing else, if you can be the parent who is able to parent in a calm, trauma-informed way. This is my protective parenting program. How do we parent these children who are coercively controlled? Because they need different parents.
Mm. Yeah.
And so in that, if you can do that, you can actually give your children the gift of perspective, which I think is there's no weighing that. That's an amazing gift. So
Hey, anyone listening, you need to, we'll link up your social media and your website handles there for anyone who's looking for help in those areas, especially regarding support for the children, because even if you stay or separate or divorce and you're co-parenting, because it's still co-parenting that has to go on, you still in one way or the other have to deal with that partner because of the children. And I love what you just said. You use a term for it, for the children. What is it called? Like when the parents are using a different style and they come to your home and you have to really have them de-escalate all over again to
right,
get back
yeah.
to
So
basics.
they're dysregulated, right? And they're very traumatized. I say they have broken brain. They are literally walking a tightrope, and they fear the abuser so much that they sometimes align with the abuser because that feels almost safer, because they've seen what the abuser does when you don't align with the abuser. Very harmful to the children's brains, and there is a way to remedy it. Protective parents can remedy it. It's a different way of parenting, and that's what I teach, is a different way of parenting. And then I'm hoping to help clinicians see clearly, and also divorce coaches and things like that.
Yeah.
We can really support our clients and create more allies. I'm so grateful you're doing this work. I'm
Wow,
so
please
grateful.
let us know of any upcoming programs we can tap into as clinicians, as parents ourselves, as people are going through. What do you have coming? How do we reach you? We're going to link it, but can you tell us about anything upcoming that we can truly link into?
Sure. So my protective parenting program is for moms. In particular, dads can take it self-study, but
Okay.
but moms can take it live if they would like to, and it offers coaching and support for moms who are navigating their children either afraid to go to the abuser's house or coming home really dysregulated. How do we create a safe space so they get that gift of perspective?
Wow.
So important, because I always say these abusers started day one. Just because you didn't see the abuse until you were maybe 10 years into the relationship, they've been trying hard to diminish you with your children. I don't call it co-parenting, I call it counter-parenting, right? They are constantly working to counter-parent. But in addition to that, I have a clinician training that has CEs, and it's for anybody working in the field, and it's 14 hours, and I actually am running it tomorrow and Friday. And I will be running it again in May. And I
Okay.
have a coach training that is for divorce coaches. It's not as in depth clinically as the clinician training is. And then
Mm.
I have a master class for attorneys. So it's a 2.5 hour master class. Attorneys can, share it with their whole office, but it really just goes over soup to nuts what coercive control is and how victims and survivors are harmed and what the anatomy of this abuser is. Because to your point, I don't necessarily believe that judges and lawyers don't get it all the time. I honestly wonder if they do get it and they just don't care. And that is really upsetting and disturbing. So,
Oh, to that point, a lot of lawyers, judges, and no shade to any lawyer or judge here was listening or might check it out. A lot of lawyers and judges, have those tendencies. So they can align a little bit with that sometimes. Sometimes, there's a lot of egos at play in those professions. Not to say that, every profession
yeah,
there's
true,
that,
true.
spectrum, of course. So
Mhm.
I truly appreciate it. If I'm not able to catch it this month, definitely because I'm like tight, but I'm looking a lot. I saw that, and I myself is gonna be part of that course for
Awesome.
clinicians. Absolutely, 100% need to learn more
We
about
would
this.
love to have
I
you. I'm
look
hoping by
forward
May I'll have it CE approved for psychologists and for any other mental health professionals.
Oh,
Fingers
I'm
crossed.
gonna sign up.
So
Absolutely for
thank
May.
you. Thank
Yes. So I'm so appreciative. I know you're a busy woman. Hopefully, maybe I can catch you again sometime later this year. As that, checking out your availability there. But I really appreciate your time,
Thank
and
you.
we'll link all the stuff here. If anybody's joining us for this first time, really check out Dr. Christine Cucciola's site and learn a lot about this, because this is a very important matter that happens in our society, our communities. And like I say in all my videos, if you're able to whip it in your mind, especially when it comes to trauma and trauma abuse in our children, you can whip it everywhere else in your life, including your relationships and dealing with coercive control. So really appreciate your time. Have a great rest of your day. And
Thank
guys, I'll catch you at the next video. Thank
you.
you so
Okay.
much.
Thank you. Bye
Yeah.
bye.
See you soon.